Hey, it's Medium Jenny Lee, and I'm here with the second book discussion for the Raw Contact. I've made it through all of the introductory materials, which was a lot. And what has been discussed so far was the fact that the book that I have right now is the second edition of what originally was 5 books that basically were just transcripts of the recordings that took place between the 3 people that were involved in this channeling experience. They took place over the course of 3 years, starting in 1981, which just happens to be the year I was born. And they were able to ask a lot of questions. I think it was like 2,600 questions or something like that. So I've marked some things that I wanted to discuss first, since I've read all the beginning stuff here. So there was a whole bunch of people that helped make the second edition. So the second edition, which came out in, I believe, 2018. Yes. The second edition that came out in 2018, a whole bunch of people re-listened to all of the tapes from the early 80s. And they pretty much just rewrote the whole thing, fixing grammatical errors and whatnot. So originally it was 5 books. I want to point out there's a little ankh right there, Egyptian. There was originally 5 books, and after they re-listened to them and they were able to compile them down into 2. So I believe this new edition, there's a volume 1 and a volume 2. Hallelujah. That probably means that the original books were a little bit smaller and these new editions are much bigger. Which, yes, with all the extra added bonus stuff, which also includes an index at the end, the first volume is over 500 pages. So we're going to be doing these discussions for quite a while. So the introduction of the book has a lot of really interesting stuff in it. And things that I marked. Let's see here. So, yes, Ra was the entity that contacted the Egyptians. And the Egyptians, what happened, according to this book, according to what the Ra that came through for them said, was that they misunderstood it and they distorted it. And the royal elite, because humans like to do that, kept all the information for themselves and they didn't share the information with the general public. So the Ra entity that this book is talking about claims that they decided to leave the Egyptian experience and left them to their own devices because they basically were doing their own thing and not listening. What a shocker, right? Okay, so this part is interesting. So collective consciousnesses, they're calling social memory complex. Social memory complex. And this particular entity is supposed to be a 6 density, which, there's a lot of talk and discussion about the different levels of frequencies and whatnot. So they're calling them densities. They're claiming they're a 6 density memory complex. Now, here's where things get a little bit, what are they talking about here? Because here it says, the entire social body that consisted of many unique individuals who also have access to a shared group repository of memory and identity. So to me, that made it sound like it's a whole bunch of entities that are basically blended together. They can act as one consciousness, and they're can access each other's memories and experiences and feelings, but they still retain their individuality, which is really interesting because remember when we were doing our spirit art, the one painting that we did, this painting that we did, which I believe was like the third one that we did on Twitch, that's what it was talking about. It was, which I don't think it was talking about this particular social memory complex. I think this was talking about more on our level of how we retain our individualness, but we can blend together. But when it was talking about that, it really made me think of it, you know. It made me think of, okay, I can kind of understand that, because we've experienced that through our channeling with whoever we're channeling with. I don't even know all the way yet. But this seems like on a completely different level. However, okay. So, but then it says, to Ra, as a social memory complex, there is no distinction between an individual and the whole group. What? You just said that they retain their individuality, and now you're going to say that there is no distinction. Does that mean that the particular social memory complex that is Ra doesn't have any distinction between their individuals anymore? That they've completely blended and melded together to the point where they see themselves as one entity? But that not all social memory complexes are like that? So this is a question I already have. And perhaps the answers will unfold throughout the rest of the book. There's some contradictory things already. Next, so they also claim, this particular Ra claims that there's a larger group called the Confederation of Planets that is in service to the one infinite creator, and that there are other social memory complexes from other planets within our Milky Way galaxy. And the Confederation's primary message has always been that we live in a universe of unity, that the world as we perceive it is an illusion, and that we are here to learn how to give and receive love, that meditation is one of the principal means of discovering the creator that exists in all of us. Now that really spoke to me, because that's pretty much where I'm at. That's what I'm feeling. And actually, I've said this to, I believe, to Charity. She might have been the only person that I mentioned it to. Maybe to Frosty. I might have mentioned it to Frosty. I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm not Christian. I'm not religious, never have been. It just wasn't part of my upbringing. But, you know, because I live in a Christian society, for the most part, I know a lot about the Bible. I know a lot about the stories in the Bible and the teachings of the Bible, and et cetera, just because it's, you know, as an American, it's our majority religion, and I shall not say anything bad, but it gets shared a lot. Let's just say that. So the creation story from the Bible says that God created us in his image. But I'm starting to think that that doesn't mean his physical image. Like, I never thought that anyway. But I don't think it means his physical image. Like, I don't think that God looks like an old white dude with a long white beard sitting on a throne. I think what it really meant was that, which this which so many things explain this, and it just feels so right to me that God or the infinite creator or the source or whatever, we're created in its image because we too are creators. That's it. We don't look like the infinite creator or the one source or God physically. It's because we create. We have the ability to create. And that's what that means. And that's what this book just said. So, yeah, okay. So I'm feeling that part. That was definitely a home run. Okay. So next. We encourage the seeker not to remove the focus from the one infinite source of light and love, of which we are all messengers, humble and knowing that we of ourselves are but the tiniest portion of the Creator, a small part of a magnificent entirety of infinite intelligence. So, I feel like a lot of us spiritualist people, and when I mean spiritualist, I don't mean like the spiritualist. I just mean people that look at spirituality from a non-religious lens. I think we all feel that our souls are this tiny little bit that is part of the whole. We're a tiny bit of a part of the whole, and that really we're all the same thing. And that's what this whole book is about. It's the law of one, the fact that every single thing that is created in the whole universe is a tiny bit of the whole. Which also, if you want to, goes right back to the Bible too, right? God created this, that, and this, that, and the other. Yes, from himself, which is not a he. Things get so complicated and convoluted when you're trying to use English, because words don't always work. Okay, so where were we? I already read that part. Okay, so then this part was pretty interesting. And this always confuses me. Okay, so they're saying, in truth, there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong. That we're all, and it says that again at the end of the introduction. We use the word true above, but remind you that you are the truth that you seek, which that's one of the messages that comes up all the time in our readings when we do them on Twitch together, is that the answer is always like, look within. Look within, people, because you are part of the whole. So, they're saying, even though they're laying out all of this 500 pages of information, and then there's a whole nother book that's probably 500 pages of information, that you have to take from it what you think is correct and what you feel is correct, that's excellent that they say that in this book, because that's what I was going to do anyway. So here's another way of saying that we're all bits of the whole. Ra reports that the Creator has made the infinite creation out of itself for the purpose of knowing and experiencing. So that is something that I cannot eloquently put, but that Charity has said more than once, at least on her Patreon, some of her Patreon videos, that if we were only still one entity together, that we wouldn't be able to experience things, that we wouldn't be able to interact with others because there aren't any others, and that we wouldn't be able to experience love, which clearly is like the most important thing, right? You can love yourself, but you can't receive love if it's just you. So therefore it gets broken up into all these bits and pieces so that it can experience and learn and know and grow and have all these experiences that it would have never been able to have if it was just one thing by itself. That makes sense to me. Okay. So here's all the densities broken down. And, I don't know how I feel about all this still. I kind of like the way that this book explains the densities, which we also call frequencies or the levels. There's a lot of different words, and they're all the same thing. And a lot of different spiritualists, spiritual people have come up with all kinds of different levels. And some of them, there's all these different, there's a different number of them. So according to this Ra entity, it's going to be really hard for me to not say he. It explains that there's eight of them. Well, there's 7 major ones to start with. But see, then it gets confusing after that. So the first one is basically the elements, which is what creates everything biologically. And then the second one is the bacteria and single-celled organisms going into the lower stages of plants and animals. And then the third density is where humans fall in, which is a fully activated spirit. So it's not that all the lower things don't have a bit of spirit in them, but we have an activated spirit, which basically to me I think means that we're conscious of ourselves. The book doesn't say that. I feel like that's what it means. So then there's the spectrum of love. So then there's this exclusive love for yourself, which is basically, people who are only out for themselves, which, good Lord, we have a lot of those in America. And then it goes to the other end of the spectrum, which is service to others. So not just loving yourself, but loving everybody else. Okay, got that. So the fourth density, move into the fourth density, which supposedly is where Earth is headed. But after a lot of the most recent events of the past, I don't know how many years, I think there's a lot of things trying to make us slide backwards. The fourth density is love and understanding. So basically, I think when the majority of people fit into this service to others love, then we can move on to the fourth density. But I don't know if we're going to ever get there. And this was a part that I thought was really interesting. Where thoughts become things. Where thoughts become things. So I read this other book. It's up on that shelf somewhere. Ruth Montgomery. And I think it was the Aliens Among Us book. And in her Aliens Among Us book, it talked about people who had been channeling aliens or whatever. The aliens were basically saying that they could create and move through time and space using their thoughts. That you could break down all the biological matter because it was just an illusion, and that you could reform it just using your thoughts, which is really difficult for us to understand or believe. I guess because we're still in this third density, right? But I thought that was really interesting that came up again after I'd seen something like that already. So that's fourth density. Oh, here's another thing where I have a question. Okay. Positive and negative polarities separate from each other. To inhabit environments more suited to their respective and divergent courses of evolution. What in the hell does that mean? I have a theory of what I think that means. So positive and negative sources separate in the fourth density. So does that mean, okay. Hold on a second. All right. So I know for a fact that the actual, here I'm really talking about the spiritualists. The spiritualists only will focus on love and light, and they reject anything that's the shadow or the negative. Which is like putting blinders on, I think. But it's understandable, I guess. But it's, you know, I don't know if they're saying that it just doesn't exist, or if they think that if they just don't want to acknowledge it. If they just don't want to acknowledge it, that's fine. I can understand that. If they're trying to say that it doesn't exist at all, that's BS. We know that it does. And I thought that was interesting that this is saying that that's where they separate. So all the negative crap would go into its own space and function there in its own space, but they're still in the same space. So does that where this concept of like demons and negative shadow people and whatever the hell else weird shit happens, that's like the bad stuff, is that where that separates and lives? I don't know. Question number 2. That's my question number 2. So, all right, so next, we talked about all that. All right, the fifth density is where wisdom happens, and it doesn't go much more into that in this little introduction. So 4th is love, 5th is wisdom, and 6 is where it blends together. And then the 7 is where it starts to, it refers to as a foreverness. And then the 8th, it mentions only 7 major ones, but then it says there's an 8th where that's where it goes back to the creator. But then after that, basically, like it talks about it as like a note, you know, an octave, using like a musical reference or sound reference, that there's 7 or 8 of the first octave, but then after that there's like an infinite number of octaves. So I guess to other spiritual people's beliefs where they have broken it down into more levels of frequencies, maybe that's where that comes into play. But this particular entity is just saying that there's really 7 or 8 of the first kind of level where we're basically are, but then there's like infinite number of them after that. So that's weird. Okay, so then it goes into the background of the people who made this channeling possible. So the Don Elkins guy, he ends up being a professor of mechanical engineering and physics, but he's super interested in like how everything really works. And of course, science doesn't always explain that. So then he starts investigating UFOs and paranormal stuff. And then Carla Ruckert, I think is how you say it. I'm saying it better this time, at least, even if I'm still saying it wrong. She considered herself to be a mystical Christian, and she was basically just really into meditation. And they talk about how she was just a very loving, kind of pure person. So she ends up being the channeler. She's the one who Ra comes through. Don Elkins is the scientific guy who's like setting up the experiments. And then later on, the Jim McCarty comes along, and he's basically like a hermit living in the woods of Kentucky, but he's interested in what they're doing. So, and they all become very interested in each other. So in 1980, they move in together. And then they start this whole process that ends up being these books. So in 1961, Don gets this book called The Brown Notebook, and it's basically it explains an encounter with this guy who had a face-to-face interaction with an alien. So then he decides that he would like to do an experiment with multiple people meditating to see if they can if they can be contacted by aliens through meditation. He does this experiment because, he's a professor, and that's where Carla, she comes to it. By the end of that first experience, basically nobody channeled anybody, but they were being contacted. They just didn't know what to do with it. But then eventually they end up learning how to channel. Carla and Don go their separate ways, but then they end up coming back together in 1968. They start this company, Light and Love Company, which they just refer to as L&L. And then you fast forward to 78. That's when Jim comes along. And then by January 15th of 1981, I'm growing in my mom's belly, and they're starting this process. So Carla was actually trying to teach another student how to channel, and then all of a sudden she starts channeling Ra, like out of nowhere. So they come up with this whole crazy process of how to channel him, what they think is the best way to channel him, which is for Carla to be unconscious, which is what I usually have been referring to as like a full trance state, where the medium would actually their spirit physically leaves their body, and another entity's spirit enters their body and is able to use that person's body fully to vocalize, to share information, or to do other things. Edgar Casey was one of these full trance mediums. He was referred to as the sleeping prophet, because he would go to sleep and then all of a sudden he would start speaking and people could ask him questions and he would be able to answer them about all kinds of stuff, like helping someone on the other side of the country find a medication that's going to help them with whatever their ailment is, or answering questions about Atlantis or whatever. So if you're not familiar with Edgar Casey, he's somebody that I learned about early on, who was a full trance medium. He would go to sleep and then he would channel. So that's what Carla does. She goes to sleep and then this Ra entity is channeling through her. Okay, so this is where things get interesting, because they have a very specific way that they're channeling. Like, she has to be unconscious. It's question and answer only, which they do say that when she's unconscious, that they get much greater precision and depth to their information, which, compared to a conscious channeling, which is something that I do, where I'm not fully leaving my body. I'm just letting them blend with me, and then it comes through. So yes, I definitely agree with that. But then they come up with all these weird ritual things that help them, I guess. And one of the weirdest ones, and you can see I wrote, what? LOL. Basically, okay, so already Jim and Carla have decided to have a relationship, and eventually they do end up getting married, and they're married until Carla passes away. I don't know if Jim's still alive, but Carla passes away in the 2000s at some point. But so I love how they explain it. It was discovered that sexual energy transfers lengthen the Ra sessions by increasing Carla's vital energies. So Carla and Jim, having developed an intimate relationship, would dedicate this transfer to the one creator and the Ra contact. When I read that, I was sitting drinking my coffee, and my little one was sitting watching YouTube, and I just busted out laughing, and she's like, "What are you laughing about?" And I'm like, I can't even tell you. It was just so funny. So basically, the night before they would do a channeling session, Carla and Jim would get it on. Whose idea was that? Is what I want to know. Was it Carla's idea? Maybe. That sounds like it was probably Jim's idea. It would lengthen her vitalities. I think it would make you more tired. Anyway, I just thought that was really funny. So after that, then the next day, they would set up all this, they would meditate together the night before in the morning of, then they would set up this stuff above her head that Ra suggested that they set up. And at first I was like, what? Why would this entity suggest these things to set up? But then it said it's because those are the things that were made Carla feel comfortable. And it was a Bible, incense, a chalice of water, and a candle, because she had been part of her church's altar guard. And that's what made her comfortable during when she was channeling. So it's like a, a ritual thing, because rituals make humans feel like they can do stuff. That's just the way we are. We have to do this, and this, and that order so that we can do blah, blah, blah. But really, we don't have to do any of that stuff because we are a little bit of the source. So there's no reason that we have to do any of those things. But it's what makes us feel comfortable so that we can do it. Truth. Okay. So then over the course of the 3 years, yes, there it is. Dawn was able to ask 2,600 questions. That's why there's so many frickin' books. 2,600 questions. Okay. The last thing I marked was, oh yeah, we talked about that already. That you are the truth that you seek. So, in conclusion, the beginning of the book, which I've only made it to page, does it even start with a number yet? Okay, I'm on page 23. Thank God there's some numbers already. Getting to the part where they actually start the sessions, there's already a ton of information, and I already have a bunch of questions. So we'll see if my questions get answered. What I have a feeling is probably going to happen is that I'm probably going to have more questions than answers, because that's just what happens. But so far, I would say that a lot of the information that has been presented thus far, it's stuff I already felt and knew. So I'm excited to see what comes about in the rest of the book with the sessions with Ra. But here's my last question for this vlog, this discussion session. This is my last question. And we're already at 32 minutes. I've been yakking for 32 minutes. If they're having to do this like crazy ritualistic kind of setting up of everything so that they can channel Ra, and I understand that it's in a totally different way, and they're getting way more in-depth information where she's laying there for like an hour letting Ra channel through her. How the hell am I doing it? How the hell am I doing it? Why is this entity, if it's the same entity, coming to me in the Twitch streams to talk to our sitter, who it comes to try to communicate with? And will that ever unfold all the way? Because our sitter that this entity tries to communicate with, at this time, I don't think they want to go any further with it. So I would never push them to. But because I have been the channel of which this entity has come through to try to speak to that person, I feel like I could ask this entity to come through just on my own, because I know that I can connect to them, and it feels really weird and completely different than any other entity that I've connected with. But I've done it twice now, and I feel like I could do it again if I personally wanted to. Not that our sitter wants it to happen, but if I wanted to communicate with this being, the being that we are having come through that says that they're Ra, I feel like I could. So I don't know. I have a feeling this is going somewhere, and that's why I'm spending all this time recording these discussions as I'm going to read through this book. But I don't know where it's going to take us. But I'm really glad that you all are here on this journey with me of this, whatever it's going to be. I can tell you right now, I flipped through some of the pictures they have at the end of this book, and the stuff that this Carla lady put herself through so that she could channel Ra the way she did, I would never do. So her dedication to this is way stronger than I would ever be able to do, which we'll get to that when I get to it in the book. You know, I cheated and went through and looked at stuff ahead of time. Anyway, this video is plenty long enough. So, you know, I want this to be an interactive discussion. So as you watch it, what questions do you have? What questions do you have so far? What kind of things are you curious about? What do you hope comes through? And what kind of information do you hope it is talked about in the rest of the book? What questions do you have about the information that has come about so far? What do you feel is right? What do you not feel is right? Put it down in the comments, and let's get a discussion going here that's not just me talking to the screen. I want to know what you guys think and feel. And I'll be back with another one soon. And don't forget, if you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. And I'll be back soon with the discussion number 3. Bye-bye!